The ongoing labor shortage is having far-reaching effects, from intensifying inflation and supply chain disruption to extending wait times for online orders and home renovation projects. What's behind the so-called Great Resignation, and what are companies doing to address it? I'm Peter Kuznick, industry analyst for the Freedonia Group, and I'm here with my colleague, Jenny Mates-Christ, who's been closely tracking these trends to discuss it. So Jenny, we're hearing a lot about the Great Resignation. What does it mean?
Well, basically what we're talking about is an increased level of worker mobility. In the last few years, the volatile economy of the pandemic era really had a lot of consumers staying put, if they could, the security of staying with what they know. But then the upheaval of the pandemic led to a lot of workers to really reevaluate their work lives, whether that meant looking for a more flexible work from home or part-time situation, or looking for something that paid better, or looking for something just to make a change to something they like better, or to a place where they feel more valued. As for many in the pandemic, it made them realize that life is too short, and they don't want to have an unhappy work life. So a lot of people were looking to make a change.
And talk a little bit about what's behind the labor shortage.
Well, in general, the pandemic led to a lot of people leaving the workforce for one reason or another. Now, remember, for starters, nearly 1 million Americans died from the pandemic itself, including a lot of working age adults. And still others were disabled by their encounter with the virus, and that removed a lot of people from the workforce to start with. Then you consider the people who retired early, and they just didn't want to work during the pandemic. Then think about those who left the workforce for caregiving responsibilities. Parents with children at home dealt with homeschooling, remote schooling, reduced access to either in-home or center-based daycare. Those with elderly relatives found themselves taking on care responsibilities, either to keep their own pandemic bubble small with their loved ones, or out of concern for shutdowns or outbreaks that had been occurring at senior living facilities. Then think about those who left the workforce due to pandemic burnout. Especially we're thinking about healthcare workers, people in education, people in food service, people in retail or e-commerce fulfillment and delivery. Workers in these areas felt a high level of stress during the pandemic, and some just said that's enough. Finally, there's a lot of lost potential employees as immigration dropped with border closures, limited international mobility, political concerns. There's so many industries we have here in the United States that rely on incoming labor, either to supplement what we have here or for seasonal skills. And if you don't have those immigrants coming in, it's a real cut.
Yeah, there's so many different aspects to this, and so many contributors. And what are the key impacts to the American economy?
A lot. It's so far-reaching. So you think about number one, there are a lot of production impacts. If there aren't enough workers to produce the goods that we need. Second, you think about if transportation is compromised, if there's not enough fulfillment or delivery workers. And then you think about service being slowed, if there's not enough retail or food service workers to handle customer demand. And then all of these come together to really raise the cost of doing business and add to the pressures from supply chain issues to rapidly rising energy prices that contribute to forcing prices upward. Then we think about workers who enable other workers to stay in the workforce. For instance, the very real lack of daycare teachers has meant that some childcare facilities have either closed or raised prices to attract more teachers, both of which challenge parents who can't work themselves without this level of support. When you think about loss of nurses or other medical support staff means that needed health care may be harder to get, or care might be delayed, or care quality might suffer, leading to poor outcomes for many patients. Finally, we think about the potential challenges to medium and smaller size companies, which will have a harder time competing for workers with larger businesses that have deeper pockets. If you have deeper pockets, you can offer higher wages. You might have a greater ability to provide the kind of perks that workers want, or you can afford the automation technologies as a workaround. This increased concentration of sales among big firms who already enjoy market leadership to begin with can have their own cascading economic impacts on prices, innovation, local economic activity, and all that. Overall, if we don't have the workers, the economy can't generate the level of production it needs for growth. For instance, I was just reading the other day that Pizza Hut reported that their first quarter sales were down, and company leadership attributed it very heavily to not having enough delivery drivers. And they're not the only ones feeling that level of pinch.
Mm. And so you kind of touched on this a little bit, but can you go a little deeper on which industries seem to be having the most challenge attracting and retaining employees?
Yeah, some of the biggest hits come in some of the ones that have either seen really rapid increases of business because of the pandemic era, or saw their own special challenges. I'm thinking of food service, healthcare, education, retail, e-commerce fulfillment and delivery. All of these workers suffered from extra pandemic stress that it put on their workday. Any industry that previously relied very heavily on immigrant labor, I'm thinking about things like agriculture, tourism, those have also been particularly challenged.
Interesting. And so what is the solution, and how are companies handling the situation?
Well, for one thing, we're seeing rising wages. Companies have to increase their wages to attract and retain workers, particularly as their competitors also raise wages, and as workers see economic opportunities with other businesses that have higher wages. Another thing is workplace flexibility. The stay-at-home is the work from home remote options is staying up, even as COVID hospitalizations and serious infection rates continue to recede. Remote work, full or part-time, is a popular perk to many. And additionally, remote work allows a company to cast its net more widely. So potential employees are not limited to only those who already live within a reasonable commuting distance. In the case of food service and retail business, many are instituting more predictable and consistent scheduling. This is something workers have long called for. Others are using contractors to supplement. I think we see this a lot in the healthcare industry. The use of nurse and nursing aid agencies and traveling RNs is increasingly common. Other businesses are looking to contractors, a group that sometimes includes semi-retired and formerly retired folks who are interested to working, but not full-time, as a way to supplement their workforce. Along the lines of the retirees, Bloomberg just reported the other day that people who retired to the pandemic are now looking for ways to come back. They're lured by higher wages and this increased access to flexible work arrangements, even as others found that they had to return because the cost of living was so high. So looking for past employees, the formerly retired, is another way to bring in. But really, it's all about getting creative as possible. It's not just about businesses considering the workers themselves, how to find them, how to keep them, how best to use them, but it's also the process of how they do their business that often gets reevaluated. For instance, automation, that's one direction a lot of companies have turned to. If you can't attract the workers, can you automate the job? Technological innovations, such as increased incorporation of artificial intelligence, they're making a lot more types of automation possible, affordable or efficient. And I'm thinking about drone and robot delivery. I'm thinking about robots fulfilling orders in a warehouse. I'm thinking about online order taking and processing. I'm thinking about some of these technological innovations with artificial intelligence is made, like the meat processing industry, for instance. A lot of aspects of that had previously been considered too difficult for a robot or automation to handle because the work is too fine. You'd have too much waste if it was automated. So it had to be human labor, but increasingly the use of artificial intelligence has made the use of robots in these also really dangerous work easier and more likely to be successful. There's less waste, it's more accurate. So this increased use is making it so that more companies and more industries can consider automation, even if they hadn't before. Another thing they're doing is looking for ways to bring customers into the process. Some of these steps involve technology. I'm thinking about self-checkout lines at your grocery store, but some of them are really just trying to motivate a different customer behavior. For instance, Domino's, I think we've seen those ads where they're tipping their workers for picking up their own pizzas rather than using a delivery driver. But really, if necessity is the mother of invention, solutions are going to be found. You know, like I said, it's really about getting creative and being open to the kind of adjustments we might have.
Very interesting. I guess we'll continue to see how companies adapt to the changing landscape with the labor market. And thank you so much. We'll continue to follow this closely in our research, and we'll probably have another discussion about this again in the future.